Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Membet. We're going to go back to the sugya we started yesterday about Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish disagreeing about Avodah Zarah that broke. Do we assume that the idol worshiper, when he sees it's broken or she sees it's broken, will just say, "Okay, I'm not." That's obviously not an idol, as Rish Lakish said, because and can't and will nullify it because the idol couldn't protect itself from breaking. Then obviously it can protect me. Or Rabbi Yochanan who says, "No, it wasn't actually canceled by anybody. It happened by itself, right? If we're going to see some sources today, if the idol worshiper smashed it, that would be a different story. But if it broke by itself, no, will still be forbidden to benefit from. Then we had a slew of questions. We're going to have 9 altogether. Difficulties Rabbi Yochanan is going to bring on Rish Lakish. Then we'll have one difficulty Rish Lakish brings on Rabbi Yochanan. We're in the middle of the second difficulty. And in doing so, we talked about the broken statues. From there, we actually, after responding how Rish Lakish could explain it, which is basically by comparing broken statues, also broken idols are all permitted. We then threw the question back at Rabbi Yochanan, and when we threw the question back at Rabbi Yochanan said, no, we're going to distinguish between statues and between the actual idols, because the idols were definitely worshipped. That's what we call vadai. And maybe it was nullified, maybe it wasn't. And therefore, ein safek motzi midei vadan. The possibility that maybe it was worshipped, maybe it wasn't, is not in a maybe, I'm sorry, maybe it was canceled, maybe it wasn't, is not enough to take away from the vada that was definitely worshipped. Whereas when it comes to the statues, maybe it was worshipped, maybe it wasn't, and therefore maybe it was canceled, maybe it wasn't, would work because safek and safek. Then the Gemara said, why are you assuming the ein safek motzi midei vadan? Sometimes we have situations. We brought one yesterday, but rejected it because we said either it's safek and safek or it's vadai and vadai. And now we're going to bring up another one and do the exact same thing. So starting to the bottom of Mem Aleph from a bit. The ein safek motzi midei vadai? Really? Hatanya, doesn't it say in a bright time, Rabbi Yehuda, Maaseh b'shivchato shel matzik echad berimon, shitila nefel labor. There was a case of a violent person or, like a bully in Rimon. Some people actually have a different version, that it was a mosek, which is someone who was collecting the olives, okay, harvesting the olives. Rashi points out he understands it as a bully, the version that we have, matzik, but he points out it was a Jewish bully. Otherwise, you'll see it's not necessarily whatever. Anyway, we're gonna put that issue aside. So there was a matzika chabirimon, shitila nefel labor, and threw a miscarried child, a stillborn, into a pit. Uba kohen veitzitz, and a kohen came. Okay, it's actually more like from a miscarriage. Okay, there was a fetus that was thrown into the pit. Ba kohen veitzitz. Now a kohen leaned over the board to look. Now, if it's a nefel, what happens when the kohen leans over the board? It's got tuma mate, and the kohen kind of creates the kohen himself becomes like a tent over it, and the tuma goes up, and the kohen will become impure. So he leaned over the board over this miscarried fetus. What was the Kohen looking for? Wanted to see if it was male or female to know whether the mother would have to, how many days the mother would have to keep of the dam tameh, the dam tohar, right? The blood, the pure blood and impure blood that happens after the birth of a child. It's different. It's double the amount if it's a girl, if it's a female. And the rabbi said the Kohen is pure. Now, why is the Kohen pure? Did the Kohen lean over a dead fetus, which has tuma? Well, okay, there's creatures there that that basically we assume ate or pulled away, right, dragged away the fetus. So therefore, now we know this person threw a fetus. Safek garu, safek lo garu, perhaps the chulda and the bardilas, right? I think a chulda is a mole or something, and a bardilas is usually a cheetah. Anyway, the idea is that perhaps they dragged it away, perhaps they didn't. So we know vadai there was an ethel. Safek pulled it away, and yet we hold by the safek and we say the Kohen's pure. That doesn't make any sense, right? Again, that would say safek is motzi midei vadai, which would go against how we explained that source according to Rabbi Yochanan. right? V'ka'ate safek u'motzi midei vadai, and the safek overrides the vadai. So the Gemara says, again, we're going to have either it's safek or vadai. Lo tema yitila nefel labor. Wait, maybe don't say that the guy came and threw a fetus in the pit. Ela ema yitila kimin nefel labor. He threw in something that looked like it was a fetus. How could you say, right? So then it wasn't a definite fetus. So now they say, we'll see what it could be he threw in that maybe wasn't a fetus. We're going to see later. It was maybe ruach hipila. Maybe it was a sack full of something, but maybe it didn't have a fetus, right? Could be it was just a very early miscarriage, and it was just more like congealed blood, and it wasn't an actual, right? It wasn't a halachic fetus. It wasn't 40 days old already. Or perhaps they're talking about something else. It's not exactly sure when they say ruach hipila, like a spirit. Not exactly sure what that means, but we can try to explain it in the way I just did. So anyway, but it says he leaned over to see, the Kohen leaned over to see, was it male or female? It sounds like it was a fetus. Definite. So, right, because the suffix was, is it male or is it female? Not, is it a fetus or is it not? So, hachikama, read it like this. Leida'im ruach hipila nefel hitila. Was it a ruach hipila? Did he throw just a spirit or an empty, was it kind of empty what he threw in? Or was it an actual, more grown fetus, more developed fetus? The imtim tzeloma nefel hitila. And if it was this fetus, then leida'im zachar nekeva. Then he wanted to know if it was male or female, and that makes it a suffix, and that's why. And then suffix whether it was a fetus or not, and then suffix whether it was already pulled away by the time the Kohen looked inside. A second possibility. Maybe it's vadai and vadai. Since his chuldas and bardilas is there, we can know for sure. It's such a clear assumption we can make that definitely there's no way that fetus lasted there more than a few minutes because of the cheetah and chulda being there, and that would explain it. Okay. Third difficulty of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Matzah tavnit yad tavnit regel. This is our Mishnah. If you see a part of, right, you have hand or a leg of the fetus, of the idol, hare'elu asurim mipnei shekayotze behem ne'evad. So if you have a hand or a leg of the statue, actually it's not of the idol, it's of the statue, then they're definitely forbidden because people worship things like this. So now they say, but why? Aren't they broken pieces? And we already explained this. Shmuel already explained this. As again, if they're broken pieces, then they could, right? Then it would show that if things broke, they're still forbidden. And Rish Lakish said if they broke on their own, they're permitted. So for sure, right, if this was either broken on its own or broken on purpose, why would it be forbidden? So they say, no, Shmuel already explained it. It's when they're on a base. There's a base, like a stand, and the leg or the hand is on there, which makes it clear that they're worshiping it and that nobody canceled that. Source 4, ATV. Another difficulty. This is a Mishnah on Daf Yomi. A Gentile can nullify his own Avodah Zarah or his friends. But a Yisrael eino mevatel avodah zarah shel levei kochavim. But a Jew can't nullify a Gentile's idols. Now, the next Mishnah describes, it's just important to understand, the next Mishnah on Nun Gimel says, the Mishnah after this one that we just quoted, Ketzan mevatla, how do they nullify it? Kata rosh ozna, rosh chotma, rosh etzba'ah, they cut off the head of its ear, the head of its nose, the head of its finger, pachasa, or they smushed it, even though it's not missing any part, but it's smushed down. So now they say, what do you see here? If a Jew does any of these things, though, it's not considered nullified. So the question is why? Right? If the Jew cuts off the head of its ear, that's like it's worse than being broken on its own, really, right? And it's at least the same as broken on its own. And if broken on its own is permitted, then why, when the Jew does it, is it not permitted? So in other words, let's just go back to Rish Lakish's logic. If the idol worshiper is going to say, well, if the idol couldn't protect itself from being broken, so here the idol couldn't protect itself from the Jew breaking it, then obviously the idol's not going to help me. So Amar Abaye Shapchasa. Abaye explains that the Jew smushed it, and it wasn't actually missing any pieces. It wasn't actually broken. It was just smushed. So the Gemara says, still, that's considered nullified if you mush it. That was smush it. That was, or crush it. That was one of the things in the Mishnah. Hatzanan, as I just quoted to you. It says in the Mishnah, even though you're not missing any parts, if a Gentile does it, it would be broken. It would be like it was broken. So they say no. That Mishnah, Hanimile, if a Gentile takes their idol and smushes it, right, crushes it down, but without actually breaking it, clearly they mean to say this is not going to be our idol. But if a Jew did it, it doesn't necessarily mean the idol worshiper is going to say, oh, we were not going to use that anymore because it's not actually broken. And therefore, this doesn't raise difficulty according to Abaye because it's not actually broken, and therefore it wouldn't raise a difficulty to Rish Lakish, who said if it's broken, it's permitted because this case isn't broken. Rava Amar Lo Olam Chapsa Yisrael Nami Batla. Rava says no. If a Jew were to have smushed it like that, it would definitely have been nullified. Okay, theoretically, meaning me'ikar adin. Okay, based on Rish Lakish, there's a different way of understanding it. Broken is broken, going to be nullified. Whether it's broken or smushed, it doesn't make a difference. Those are all actions of nullifying. And if the Gentile did, it would be broken. If the Jew did, it would be considered, right, it would be nullified. If the Gentile did it, if the Jew did it, it would be considered nullified as well. Also, smushing. So why does this say if the Jew did it, it's still forbidden? It's not nullified. Well, it's because of a side reason, a gezerah. Okay, meaning mi'ikar adin, by the letter of the law, it should be nullified if a Jew smushes the idol or breaks it. But dilma what are we worried about? A Jew, okay, let me go back and tell you some details. A Jew who nullifies a Gentile's idols the Jew can do it. Now, we don't allow it for a different reason, because if the Jew were to own the idol, let's say the Jew took the idol of the Gentile, took ownership of it, and then tried to nullify it, the Jew can never nullify Avodah Zarah. Once it's in the Jew's hands, we don't allow it to be nullified because we don't want the Jew to end up benefiting from it. So the concern here, why did they make a gzera? Dilma magbela v'hadar mevatala. We're worried that the Jew perhaps lifted it up and then, meaning took ownership of it, then hadar mevatala, then is going to nullify it. Once the Jew has gained ownership rights to the idol can never be nullified. It will always be forbidden to benefit from. So we don't allow a Jew to nullify a Gentile's idols because we're worried that perhaps the Jew will end up lifting it, taking ownership over it, and then it won't be able to be nullified. So we don't allow nullification in any situation of a Jew to a Gentile's idols. Source number 5, Eitive. So basically for that source, we had two different answers. Okay, we had Abaye who said it was pasa, it wasn't actually broken, and therefore didn't raise difficulty with Rish Lakish who talked about broken. And then we have Rava who thought broken, smushed, it's all one and the same, but he gave a different answer, which is it's just a gzera. And we're going to go back to this answer of Rava a number of times because we're going to bring a whole slew of difficulties. And each time we're going to say, oh, we can answer it like Rava, which is it's just a gzera that in case the Jew took ownership of. So Eitive. So if a Gentile takes stones from Markulis was an idol. There was a mound of stones. Okay, and basically they would throw stones on it, and that would add to the mound, and that's kind of the way the idol worked. So if you took stones away from Markulis and the idol worshiper used it to pave streets, and put them down on the road, or use it for some other reason, it's permitted because that's canceling it, right? What would that be if not canceling it and saying, I don't want it to be an idol anymore? But if a Jew does it, it's forbidden. Again, why would it be any different than Avodah Zarah that was broken? To which they answer, we can answer this like Rava and basically say, really, it would be permitted, but we're going to forbid it lest the Jew do it again, take it for their own sake, turn it into their own, and at that point, it could never be canceled. Source number 6, Eitive. That's difficulty number 6 against Rish Lakish. Ove kochavim sheshifa avodah. If you shaved off some of the Avodah Zarah, like carved out a little bit more, shaved off some pieces for the sake of for his own sake, meaning he wants to shave off pieces so he can use it to make a fire or something. Okay, then that is basically cancellation of the idol. And so if the Gentile does this, it's permitted. Litzorka, but if he's doing it to make the idol look better, like fix it up a little bit, hiasua, so the idol is still forbidden because he was just fixing up the idol. It's still an idol. Vishipuya mutarim, but all the shavings are permitted because they're nothing, right? They're garbage now. The Yisrael sheshipa avodah zarah, but if a Jew does it, bein litzorko, bein litzorka, it doesn't matter for what purpose. He vishipuya asurim. All the parts are still forbidden. The shavings, the original part, it doesn't matter. Everything's forbidden. Again, why should this be any different from if it was broken on its own? Now it's broken because someone broke it. It should be permitted, according to Rish Lakish. Again, we're going to answer like Rava, that it's just Zarah. We don't want the Jew to take ownership of it and then do this and think that it's going to be canceled because it's not. Source number 7. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Okay, this is in the context of, it's a Mishnah that's in the context of how do you get rid of idols? If you come into the land, the Torah tells you, Abei Ta'abdun. You see idols, you're supposed to destroy them. So how do you destroy them? So you throw them in the Yam HaMelech. Okay, that's where things basically get destroyed from the salt. But Rabbi Yossi Omer, okay, so then Rashi explains here that he explains in the Mishnah, we're talking about metal implements. They can't be destroyed in Yam HaMelech. So what do we do? Okay, so you grind them up and scatter them either in the wind, the pieces, or throw the pieces into the water. Amrulo, afhina aset zeva. The rabbi said that's not going to work because if you scatter them into the wind, those pieces of the dust, right, the little pieces after you grind it up really small, those little pieces are going to work as fertilizer and you're going to benefit from that. And it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to enjoy any little bit from them. But shouldn't this be canceled Avodah Zarah? It shouldn't be even Avodah Zarah anymore because it's like broken idols. Again, we're going to answer like Rava that it's just Xera. Lest the Jew come to take ownership of it first and then do this. Rabbi Yossi ben Yisyanama, Omer. מצא צורת דרקון וראשו חתוך, ספק עובד כוכבים חתכו, ספק ישראל חתכו מותר. Okay. Now, if you find right, we assume here, if you find a form of a dragon, okay, that was used as an idol, but his head was cut off. So you're not sure whether a Jew cut it off or a Gentile cut it off. If Gentile cut it off, we're going to assume it's canceled, then you can benefit. If the Jew cut it off, right? So here, let's just read it again. Vadai Yisrael chatacho asu, right? So sorry. If it's safek ovei kochavim chatacho, safek Yisrael chatacho mutar. If you're not sure who cut it off, we're going to permit it and assume that it was nullified. But vadai Yisrael chatacho asur. But if definitely you know the Jew is the one who cut the head off the dragon, then it's permitted. I'm sorry, then it's forbidden. But why should it be forbidden? Okay, we know where this is going. Should be no different than if it was broken. Here the Jew broke it. When the Gentile sees it's broken, they're basically going to say, oh, this isn't an idol anymore. So again, we're going to say it's only Xera that the Jew maybe will turn it into the Jew's own property and only after break it, and then that won't work to nullify it. Eitivate. Last difficulty, number 9. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Aflo Yirakot b'yemot Gshamim. Okay, you need to know the beginning. Rashi tells us in Aflo Yirakot, it's a Mishnah. Zorim tachtea shel Asherah. You can plant under an Asherah tree. An Asherah tree was used for Avodah Zarah worship. You can plant underneath it, not in the summer months, because in the summer months the tree shades and we want the shade. But in the winter months, you can plant under it vegetables because the shade is actually not beneficial for what you're planting because it's generally rainy, and whatever sun there is, you want the sun, and you don't need the protection from the sun and the heat because there is no heat. But Rabbi Yossi says, you can't even plant vegetables under the Asherah tree in the winter months because the leaves, the foliage falls from the tree and it fertilizes the vegetables. So you're gaining benefit from broken parts of the idol. Why? Tavi, according to Rish Lakish, this should be fine. Tavi kavadas it's broken parts, right? It should be like avodah zarah that's broken, should be nullified, and you should be able to benefit. Shane hatan ikar avodah zarah kayemet. Here we have a different answer. Here, this doesn't have to do with the Jew doing it anyway. It happened on its own, but it's different because the avodah zarah is still there. The Eitz Asherah is still in existence. It's not like we took an idol and broke it. The actual idol is still there, which is the tree. So they say, V'hashipuyin, de'ikar avodah zarah kayemet. But wait, we talked about a case before that's going to raise a difficulty with our answer. Because if you say when the main avodah zarah is intact, the broken parts, right, are still going to be forbidden. But what did we say before? If you shave off parts of the idol to make the idol look nicer, then the idol itself is forbidden, but the shavings are permitted. So here you should say the same thing. The tree is still forbidden, but the foliage should be permitted. Right? When it said there about the shipuyim, it said shipuyim are actually permitted. So Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua Amar Lefisha Ein Avodah Zarah B'Teila Derech Gedelata. Say no, this is different from that. This you can't ask a difficulty from the shipuyim. Why is that? Because avodah when we took the avodah zarah and the Gentiles shaved off the pieces, that ruins the pieces, right? The pieces are considered now not avodah zarah anymore. But in this case, it happened in the way that it was growing, right? The way a tree grows, the leaves fall. It's just part of a natural course of events. In a natural course of events, we don't say that that's a broken piece. We just don't view it as broken. Okay, whether he's giving a different answer to the difficulty is a good question, or whether he's just defining the answer that was already given, right? The answer given was that the Ikar Avodah Zarah is still in existence, and the pieces that broke just broke naturally. That's one way to understand it. Or it's not that the Ikar Avodah Zarah is still there, it's that these parts just fall naturally, and therefore they're not considered broken parts. Okay, so there's two ways to read that. Now we finally get, after 9 difficulties on Rish Lakish, now we're going to have a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan. Eitibei Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. If you have a nest at the top of a hekdesh tree, you have a tree, somebody consecrated, lo nehenim v'lo mo'alim. You can't benefit from the nest. However, there's no actual Isur Torah law, meaning usually lo nehenim v'lo mo'alim means you can't benefit on a rabbinic level, but it's not a do'oraita me'ila. It's not really consecrated property. And therefore, if you were to use it accidentally, you wouldn't be, right, for your own personal sake, you wouldn't be liable to bring the sacrifice to the korban me'ila. We'll explain this whole thing about the nest and the hekdesh tree in a minute, but here's the important part. Birosha shel asherah, if it's at the top of an asherah tree, yatiz bikaneh, you can take a reed and knock it down. You can't use the tree to knock it down, then you'd be benefiting from the tree, but you can take a reed, touch the nest, and knock it over. Now, when he asked this question, he assumed, how did the nest get created? From that tree itself. So the nest was made from the Asherah tree. And when the bird took the twigs from the tree, it was basically breaking the Asherah tree. And in the end, what does it say? Katana yatiz b'kaneh. You're allowed to benefit from that nest because you can knock over the nest. You just can't touch the tree, but the nest, which is made from broken parts of the tree, is permitted. That shows Rish Lakish. Broken parts are permitted. To which the Gemara answers, no, hacha b'mayas kinan. We're going to have 2 answers, by the way. What's the case? Kigonda aiteit sima alma v'kinta behem. Must be the nest actually came from other trees, not from the Asherah tree. And how can we further prove this? What we're going to do right now. So that's the answer. And then it has nothing to do with the Asherah tree. It's not broken parts of a tree, and that resolves the problem. Now, what we're going to do here is try to strengthen that answer from the wording, but then we're going to say, no, it doesn't work, the strengthening of the answer, but it doesn't mean we still don't have the answer. We just don't have the ability to strengthen the answer from the cases in the source there. So let's see. Daikanan, we can further infer that Dikatani because of the hekdesh case. It says Gabe hekdesh, lo nehenim v'lo mo'alim. Now, Iamar bishlama da'ayte tzima alma. If you assume that the trees, the wood, the twigs came from somewhere else, hainu Dikatani Gabe hekdesh, lo nehenim v'lo mo'alim. That's why it says by hekdesh, you don't benefit, but there's no me'ila because lo nehenim midirabbanan v'lo mo'alim midoraita, right? On the one hand, you can't benefit on a rabbinic level because it's like benefiting from hekdesh, but you're not really mo'alim midoraita dahalo kadisha because the nest itself is not hekdesh. It didn't come from the hekdesh tree. And then we'll say the same thing. It didn't come from the Asherah tree. Like, yeah, shishi bright, but if you say it was made from leaves, from twigs in the hekdesh tree that was consecrated, amai lo ma'alim hakadisha, those twigs were actually sanctified, consecrated, and therefore, of course, there should be me'ilah on a Torah level if you benefit from that nest. So the Gemara responds and says, no, midi iria, no, that's not necessarily the case. You don't have to say that the two cases are 100% comparable. You could say there, in other words, they're comparable in the sense you could theoretically say it was from the Asherah tree, the nest, but it still wouldn't be forbidden by Torah law when it came to Me'ilah. Why not? Because it could be talking about Gidulim that came la'achar miken. Let's say I consecrated the tree in January. And in March, already the twigs grew longer, and the bird made the nest from the twigs that had grown in between January and March. And Kasavar, and the person who wrote the Tana of this Tana, it source held Ein Me'ilah B'Gidulin. There's no Me'ilah by growths. Okay, so if I consecrate the tree in January and then use the twigs, or the bird made a nest from the twigs, it would be Me'ilah. But we're talking about that it was from the growth between January and March that the nest was made from, and that, okay, now there's a machloket, whether there's me'ilah by gidulim of a tree. If I consecrate the tree, is anything that grows from there going to be forbidden down the road? So this Tana must hold no, and that's a different way to understand that source to then prove that maybe it was taken from the tree, and then that wouldn't prove our answer. But we still have the answer, we just don't have proof of it. Source answer 2. For Rabbi Avahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, okay, this is interesting because it's in the name of Rabbi Yochanan himself, whereas before it was just the Gemara talking, suggesting, my yatiz be'efrochim, when it says yatiz, you can knock it off with a reed, it didn't mean the nest. You can't benefit from the nest. The nest really was made from the Asherah tree. That's a broken piece from the tree. It's still forbidden, okay, that's Rabbi Yochanan. But what are you allowed to knock out? The chicks that are in the nest. Amar le Rabbi Yaakov, le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa. Okay, so Rabbi Yaakov says to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Ezber alach, I'm going to explain to you something here. Efrochim kam bekam mutarim. Efrochim, the chicks, both in the case of the hekdesh tree and in the case of the Asherah tree, are all permitted because the chicks don't really need the tree anymore. But beitzim, if it was eggs that need to be in the nest still, which is part of the tree, kan v'kan asulin, they need the tree, and therefore they're going to be forbidden, whether it's in a hekdesh tree or whether it's an Asherah tree. And Amar Rav Ashi, efrochim shetzorchin li'iman kibeitzim dam. And Rav Ashi points out that if the chicks still need their mother, then they're dependent on the nest, which is dependent on the tree or made from the tree, and then it would still be a problem. Okay, so that was just an aside we got to from that. So in any case, we had, just to summarize this part of the daf, we won't summarize at the end, we had a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, about broken things that broke on their own, idols that broke on their own. Is the broken idol considered nullified and one can benefit from it, Rish Lakish, or Rabbi Yochanan says it's forbidden. We had 9 difficulties that Rabbi Yochanan brought against Rish Lakish, 1 difficulty that Rish Lakish brought against Rabbi Yochanan, and we had answers to all of the difficulties. Some we even had multiple possible answers. Now we're moving to a new mission. Hamotze kelim, you find vessels, v'alehem surat chama, surat levana, surat rakon, and they either have the image of the sun, the image of the moon, or the image of a dragon. Yolechem liyam hamelach. You have to assume that those are idols and you have to destroy them. Abei tabdun, you have to bring them to Yam HaMelach, to the Dead Sea. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, she'alam mechubadin asurin, she'alam mevuzim mutarin. It depends. If it's on a respectable vessel, like jewelry, for example, then we assume it was worshipped. If it's on unimportant things like cooking utensils, we assume you don't have to destroy it. Why not? Because we assume it was just there for decorative purposes. They just wanted to make it look prettier, but it wasn't there as an idol. Okay, on the less important vessels, we assume it's not used as an idol. So now the Gemara goes off on the fact that there's only 3 images on a vessel that are going to be forbidden. Wait, is that assuming that people only worship this, idols that are in the form of the sun, the moon, and a dragon, and not to other things? Remini, that contradicts the following source. Hashochet l'shum Yamim, l'shum narod, if you slaughter an animal for it and offer it up to the waters, right, the seas, or l'shum naharot, or to the rivers, l'shum midbar, to the desert, l'shum chama, to the sun, l'shum levana, to the moon, l'shum kochavim umazalot, to the stars of the constellations, l'shum Michael hasar gadol, to Michael, the important, right, guard up in heaven, officer, l'shum shulshul katan, for the sake of a small worm. Hare elu zivchei metim. These are all considered animals that were worshipped, that were brought as sacrifices for Avodah Zarah. So, right, zivchei metim, dead, that means idols. So now, what do you see here? They worshipped all different things. So why only the sun, the moon, and the dragon here? When it comes to worshiping, that source we brought was a slaughtering an animal to offer it up to one of those bodies of water or whatever it might be. But they'll worship anything. But but when it comes to people carving out designs in vessels or jewelry or whatever it might be, and then worship it, those are the three most important ones. Those people actually draw, make forms of it, shapes of it into vessels and worship them. But in any of the other forms, they're just merely decorative and not meant to be used as idols. Now, according to Rashi, this means that Rav Sheshet brought a bunch of braytot that were difficult, brought them into the Beit Midrash to have people think about them and figure out what the difficulties are and resolve them. So now we're going to have this source that's a little bit complicated, and we'll see why it's complicated, and we'll finish it up tomorrow. All the constellations are permitted other than the sun and the moon. V'kol partsufim, and all faces are permitted, chutz mi partsuf adam, other than the face, the image, the face of a human. V'chol tzura v'taro chutz mi tzurat rakon, and all the shapes are permitted other than the shape of a dragon. So Amar, now we have to understand this bright. It's not so clear, and if we compare it to our Mishnah, you'll notice there's three things that are the same: the Chama, the Levana, and the dragon, right? The sun, the moon, and the dragon. But we didn't have the Partsuf Adam in our Mishnah. So Amar, so let's go into this bright. What's the case? If you're talking about that they made an idol in the image of the sun or the moon, well, all the other constellations shouldn't be permitted either, right? They should all be forbidden because we just said before, right, if you offer up to the gods or if you make an idol in the shape of any of those things, then we're going to assume it's an idol, right? V'haktiv lo ta'asuniti, lo ta'asun kidmut shamashayim shamshim lefanai b'maron. Here comes the source for it. It says, don't make with me. So what does it mean with me, right? Don't make with me Elohes, kesef, Elohes ahav. Don't form out of gold and silver things that are like me. What does it mean like me? That are up in the heavenly abodes with me, like all the stars and constellations and things like that. So it can't be that that's what it's talking about, forming something in the image of one of those things, right, of the sun and the moon, because more than that should be forbidden. Ela pshita, it's obvious, it must be b'motzei. It must be when you find kelim, like our Mishnah. If you find vessels with those shapes on it, then only the sun and the moon. However, what's the problem? Well, right, ukititznan, and as it says in our Mishnah, motzei kelim balehem tzurat chamat, tzurat levanat, tzurat rakon, yadechem liyam. Okay, that's how we proved it. Now they say, wait, but even motzei, if it's when you find kelim, what about the next line in the Mishnah? That source that we just quoted. Ema mitziata, kol partzufo mutarim chutz mi partzuf adam. Even motzei, right? So then it's like the shape of a man, a human, or a woman etched into this kli. That's forbidden, but anything else would be permitted. Now, that doesn't make any sense because even motzei, partzuf adam yasser. We didn't say that was forbidden. We didn't say the partzuf of an adam is forbidden if it's in a vessel. On a vessel, it's actually fine. V'hatznan, as we know in the Mishnah, hamotzei kelim balehem tzurat chamat, tzurat levanat, tzurat rakon, yadechem liyam hamenach. It says tzurat rakon, the shape of a dragon, yes, but partzuf adam lo, but not the image of a human's face. Ela pshita be'oseh. It must be, in that case, you formed an idol with the image of a human's face, like a statue kind of thing. Now, Rav Yoshua, who says further on, Karebe lo ta'asun oti, Rashi helps us here, I'm reading Rashi. It says, Lo tasun oti kidmuti. Don't make in the image like God. What's an image like God? Humans, because humans are done b'tselem Elohim, right? We were created b'tselem Elohim, the image of God, and therefore human images are a problem. Okay, but an animal kind of image is not a problem. But that's in making an idol, not in an image on a vessel. Okay, so Iba Oseh, but now we have a problem. One thing to say, we start off with the vessel, right? An image on a vessel, and that's just the sun and the moon. Then we move to the Partsuf Adam, and there we're talking already about creating an idol. But then we zigzag back to the dracon, which seems to be, again, back to the vessel, right? Iba Oseh, if you're saying the middle case is making an image, right? Like a whole, not an image, an idol. Ema Seifa, look at the next line. Kol hatzorot mutarim mutarot chutz mitzurat drakon. You can make any shape, just not a dragon. Ibo set surat drakon mi'atzir. But if you're making an idol, like we said the previous one, the partsuf, you're making an idol in the shape of a dragon is actually not forbidden. Ha'aktiv lo tasuni ti Elohei kesef Elohei zahav hani in surat drakon lo. You can't make with me Elohei zahav Elohei kesef Elohei zahav. That's things that are like God in the heavens, like the constellations. But making the surat drakon is actually permitted. And elapshita b'motzei, it must be the kelim. I'm just going a little bit further on. It must be when you find vessels. Uchiditnan motzei kelim balihen surat chama. And then, right, because it fits in with the vessels, you find these vessels, not making, right, but you find a vessel, do you have to destroy it? Reisha b'seifa b'motzei u'mitziata b'oseh. We have this zigzag now. The first line, right, to make some sense. The first line is if you find vessels. The second line is if you create a statue. The third line is you find vessels. That doesn't make any sense to say that. So we're going to leave off here and see what Abaye has to respond to this. Get to that tomorrow. So what we did in the second part of today's daf was we learned this Mishnah about the Motzei Kelim and the Levana, Drakon, and the Chama. You have to destroy them. And then we went back and said, wait, what about other things? And we said, no, that's a difference between what you can't make versus if you find a vessel, do we assume it was just for decoration or do we assume it was for worship? Only these three things we use for worship. Then Rav Shesha brought this Braita, which we tried to make sense of it in light of our Mishnah, but we're struggling a little bit to understand that Braita. And with that, we'll finish for today. We'll get back to here in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everyone a good day.